Friends, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for your presence here today. I am Reverend Mark Keeter. I have the distinct privilege of serving as pastor and teacher of the good and faithful people who are the Congregational United Church of Christ. On behalf of the congregation, thank you for your presence here today. My role today is going to be very brief. I'm going to open us with a prayer and then close us with a prayer, but in between, we have all these wonderful people we're going to hear from, so thank you for your presence. I'm going to start by simply saying and reminding us that Jesus was born homeless, of transient parents. Mary laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. Remember hearing that? Jesus knew what it meant to not have a place to call his own. Jesus said, "Foxes have holes and birds have nests, but I have nowhere to lay my head." Providing adequate shelter at a reasonable price to people in need is, truthfully, a ministry to Christ. Inasmuch as we serve them, we are serving Christ. The validity of our faith, I think, in many ways is demonstrated by our actions. So, what can we do? Well, we can reach out with prayers, with our gifts, and with shared labor to those in need of adequate shelter, trusting God for the increase. Please join with me in a moment of prayer. Let us pray. We pray that you, O God, will bring into our hearts and minds our plans and our actions, our hopes and our prayers, a greater love for all people. Break the silence of prejudice, the isolation of ignorance, the false sense of security in earthly fortresses, and erase the fear that prevents communication. Help us to come home to your love by becoming one family on this planet we all call home. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all of you who are here today willing to talk about this very difficult subject. I'm Sharon Sinclair, one of the good and faithful people of the Congregational Church, and I will be the moderator of this panel discussion and sort of lead us through the process that will give all of you a chance to share your feelings and your observations about this problem. Also like to introduce, we have representation from Colin Peterson's office by the staff member Justin Rosted. Justin, welcome, and thank you for being here. And from Tina Smith's office, we have Carson Willett. So thank you to both of you for being here. We are covered by the press, by Vicki Gertis from the paper is here. Ed Gerke is going to be videoing this whole operation today, and Layton Broadcasting is represented by Carol McCarthy, who is here somewhere. I know she is. There she is. Very wonderful. Thank you for being here, all of you. And to introduce our wonderful panel today, we have, first of all, Liz Coppola. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Liz is the Executive Director at Mojave Ottawa Community Action Partnership, which has several programs for homeless people, from prevention and youth homelessness to long-term homeless and senior homeless people. Liz previously led the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless, including its Homes for All campaign, an effort that increased state funding for housing and homeless programs by $200 million over 4 years. So she has some experience to tell us about. And we have Karen Crabtree, who is somehow or other, I can't locate her bio, but I know Karen very well. And she is going to be, she works with the program that is with health industries, and there it is. And she manages the social services and community health at Essentia Health, and will be moving into a role as the West Market Community Health Program Manager for Essentia. And she is a coordinator for Becker County Energize and known most recently as 2017 Women of the Year by Women's 360 magazine. She has had, very good. She has had 2 homeless teens with her in the past 8 years and currently works with multiple nonprofits in the community, including addressing homelessness-related issues, and also helps support homeless people and families for a social services role. And that's Karen. And Karen, go from Karen to Karen. Karen Fritz Daly, who is the homeless liaison for Detroit Lakes Public Schools. Karen works with district staff to identify students who qualify as homeless by the definition of the McKinney-Vento Act. Karen has worked with homeless families in Hennepin and Becker County for over 15 years. And that's Karen. And we have Anna Celine. Anna Celine is the Executive Director of the Lakes Crisis and Resource Center, which offers several programs to the community, including advocacy, children's services, a parenting time center, mental health services, kinship, and a domestic violence emergency safe shelter known as Mary's Place. The Lakes Crisis and Resource Center was established in 1978 and has evolved considerably in response to the needs of the community over the last 40 years by adding new and enhanced programming and services. And Anna has been involved with the Lake Crisis Resource Center for over 14 years, including 6 years on the board of directors prior to joining the staff. All right, so now, without further ado, let's hear from our speakers and the expertise they have on this very difficult subject. Liz, can you start us off with an overview of homelessness? Why do we have homelessness in our community?
We have a disagreement about whether we should sit or stand, so, all right, stand. So homelessness started in a big way in Minnesota in the early 1980s. So before the 1980s, what we had was a federal government who invested in housing in 3 different ways that changed in the early 80s. So the federal government invested in public housing, building housing owned by local governments. They slowed down that investment in a big way in the early 80s. They used to invest in private developers developing affordable housing. They cut back on those investments significantly in the early 80s. And then the third thing they cut in the early 80s was Section 8 rental assistance. And so the kind of voucher where a low-income person can take it to a private landlord, pay 30% of their income in rent, and the voucher would pay the rest. So all of those got cut back drastically in the early 80s, and homelessness skyrocketed and really has continued to increase. And so across Minnesota, most of the homeless shelters in the state started in 1983, 1984. And then homelessness has started, so we started seeing more and more homeless with folks who were in crisis, had some mental health struggles or chemical dependency, and then with the lack of investment in housing and rental assistance, it's really grown to become a family issue. So low-income families just aren't making enough money to be able to pay rents in our communities. So the thing that gives me hope about that is that it was public policy that led to homelessness, and it will be public policy that will guide us out of homelessness. So we'll talk more about that throughout our discussion.
Karen, you have a very real story to tell about homelessness, and you could share it with us now and then talk a little bit about what you're doing about it now.
Yeah, 15 years ago at 3 o'clock in the morning, I took my 3-year-old son and put him in a car with very few belongings, and I had to leave because our home was not safe. I was lucky though. I had parents, I had somewhere to go, and I drove 10 hours in the middle of the night and brought my son to my parents' house where I asked if I could live with them until I could get back on my feet because I couldn't go back to that home. So for me, homelessness is real because I was there for 6 months when I was younger, and it took me some time to get back on my feet, and I was so lucky that I had loving and supporting people to help me do that. I later went back for my education in social work and then my master's in community development because I wanted to understand how to create solutions to some of these community issues. Currently in my role with Essentia, I see homelessness, the impact on personal health and also in our community in many different ways. We had a care conference for a patient about a month ago with 7 different agencies. And collectively, when we sat around the table, we knew the underlying issue was a homelessness issue, but that we've spent over $1 million collectively between our agencies trying to support this person because there's no place for her to be. I see it in our emergency room, in our clinic. If you're homeless, you know how hard it is to get your medication and to have somewhere to keep it without it getting stolen. People who have anything like diabetes, how do you check your blood sugar if you don't have someplace to live? And so it's very real, and we see it all over the place through Becker County Energize. I work more on the community level and how do we, in doing needs assessments and looking at what are the issues in our community, and then working with people on solutions. We just conducted our community health needs assessment a few months ago, and the second issue that the community thought was the biggest issue is affordable housing. Because we have a significant amount of people that have a housing burden, so more than 30% of their income goes towards housing and rent. And the average home in our community doesn't match what the average wage is by any means. And so we're also looking at not just homelessness and how it impacts people, but what do we have in our community around that, so.
Karen, can you tell us how homelessness looks in our schools, which is shocking to, and you will tell us, I know the numbers, but it is a shocking thing to think that there are kids in our town who are homeless.
Thank you, Sharon. Coming off of Liz's talk about kind of the history of homelessness and her mentioning families, that's a big piece of homelessness. And where education comes in is also from the 80s. The McKinney-Vento Act was established in 1987, and it was signed in by law by Ronald Reagan. So that is federal law that ensures educational rights and protections for homeless children. And it also dictates that every school district has an established person who is a homeless liaison. And so that is me for Detroit Lakes Public Schools. That person works with school staff to identify homeless children, and you think that's a challenge to identify homeless children. It's a lot easier when you live in a community. I worked in Hennepin County for a long time, but it's a little easier there when you have shelters, giant shelters that house a lot of people. And so school buses are coming in and out of the shelters all the time, and they're trying to maintain stability for those kids in those schools. But we have, a lot of our children live in similar situations like Karen described. They're doubled up with other family or friends due to the lack of housing, lack of affordable housing that's available in our small community. So that's something that we look for, and our secretaries, our teachers, our staff are working hard to identify those students so we can reach out and make sure that they have resources available to them. We had, and I can talk a little bit, I don't know if you want me to cover our numbers now or later, or go for it, I guess. All right. So here's some of the definition for homeless for educational purposes. So this is what is defined as homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act. So it may not be the same for housing programs, but this is what we look at for educational purposes. So living with others, such as the situation that Karen had described, living in motels, campers, sleeping in places not meant to be slept in, living in shelters, such as the crisis center. Unaccompanied youth are considered youth who are still in school but are not living with a guardian, legal guardian or parent. Last year we had 20 unaccompanied minors in our school district. This year we already, I think, have 24, 25 that we have identified. And so there's more than that number, because I don't think we always reach every single student that we have in our school district that's homeless. So in talking about living in motels, campers, sleeping in other places, I think it was last winter or the winter before, I had our police liaison, our school liaison police officer had found a student, or had been called to an apartment building because one of our students was sleeping in the furnace room of an apartment building. And so I had just gotten settled into work that morning. It was, like 8 o'clock, and he had brought him to me to, get some resources for this student because somebody in the apartment building had noticed him sleeping in the furnace room. This is in the middle of winter. He had no place to stay. Another situation we had, and I'll say Mojave is such a great organization to work with. They have such great staff, and we work together closely. They do have
thumbs up.
I know. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So they're great to work with. We together worked with a lot of the same families, but we had a family that had 4 children. The oldest was a kindergartner, and they were living out of a van in one of the parking lots here in town. And so working together, they were addressing the housing issues and trying to find them housing. It was right around Thanksgiving, I believe. It got really cold, and Mojave helped, shelter them short term in a motel during the really cold weather. But we had the school bus picking up our kindergartner in the parking lot of a business in town. And so she made it to school every day, which was awesome. But they had 3 younger children still living in that car, and Mojave ended up housing that family. But I think that is part, the law is set up so that those kids have protections. Transportation is a big piece of that. If we have a student who is living in Detroit Lakes, their children are going to Detroit Lakes schools, but they may be moved to Frazee because they have a place to stay now with family or friends. We would be busing those children from Frazee back to Detroit Lakes schools so they don't have to change school districts. Last year, our numbers for Detroit Lakes schools, we had 17 living in shelter, 62 children lived with other families or friends, 2 lived in places. Those are both the examples I gave you just a little bit ago. And then 8 living in motels, and we had last year 20 unaccompanied minors. I think I'll cover the rest, I guess, as we move along. Here you go, Anna. Go ahead.
It's kind of hard just having one microphone up here that's working, but it's so wonderful to hear of the coordination among the organizations, because you can see how that would be a critical part of it. And I'm sure, Anna, that with the people who are victims of domestic assault, there's a great impact on the homelessness factor.
Thank you, Sharon. And I have to say, listening to all of you, I can see and think of many clients that we've had in mutual. But one thing that's different from the clients that we see, of course, is they have a history of domestic violence or have found themselves in a situation, unfortunately, like you were, Karen. And when these individuals come to us, sometimes there was an opportunity to leave, it's one shot, and they're with us and we can help them move on. In other cases, it's a history that's been going on for years and years and years. Depending on the situation, it can be incredibly difficult to find housing. As we've all shared, affordable housing is very difficult to find in Detroit Lakes, as well as some mental health issues that may come along with these individuals if they've suffered years and years of abuse. That can make all aspects of their life challenging. Do they have medications? If they do they take them correctly? Are they able to even get their medications and keep them? And all of these challenges create additional barriers in finding housing. They may not have good rental history, they may not have any rental history. Their credit could be poor, if non-existent. So we do enlist the help of other agencies. Our advocates are awesome and will turn every stone to try to find a way to help these individuals. One thing that I was going to mention as well, with the homelessness, with domestic violence that we see, as Karen had stated, she had family that she could go to. Unfortunately, the women that come to us with their children don't have that. They don't have any healthy supports in their life, or at least not any that are close. If they have a friend that they could stay with, perhaps that's not a healthy or safe place for them or their children. So they come to us, and can you imagine how difficult that would be if you don't have, your family cycle is abuse, is neglect. It's just unhealthy. And so they come to us and we embrace them and do everything that we can to help them and get them back on their feet, but it's a challenge.
So we do have a problem. It's pretty clear that we have a problem in the community. There's a problem in almost every community around, I guess, but we have a guest today who is from the Place to Belong in Fergus Falls, or directs that program. Her name is Sue Wilkin, and you want to come forward, Sue? You wanted to share some thoughts with us.
Thank you. I'm here because we actually have a club in Detroit Lakes. A Place to Belong is a social club for people with mental illness. And what you were saying, Anna, about mental health, and Liz too, about mental health impacting homelessness. I do have one story to share with you. We have approximately 6 people who are homeless at a Place to Belong, and we do not provide treatment, therapy. We're not a residential setting. Both the club in Detroit Lakes and the club in Fergus Falls has, under an emergency circumstances, let someone stay overnight rather than having them freeze to death. But this winter, I'll just share this quick story with you. This winter we had a gentleman who's chronically homeless. He has a lot of mental health issues, not welcome, burned most of his bridges through no fault of his own. We don't sign up. How many of you would sign up for mental illness? No, probably not. Anyway, he stayed with us a couple of nights because there was nowhere for him to go, and it was, if you remember this winter, it was way like 25 below. And then the county said, you know, you're not licensed to do this, you can't let him stay another night. So I had to tell him that. And at the end of the day, when we were closing the doors, I said, are you gonna be okay? Where are you gonna go? Homeless people do not tell you where they're going. They do not want anyone to know, because they do not want a police officer to come and pick them up and take them to wherever the police officer thinks they should be. So he looked at me and he says, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Okay. But I could tell by the look on his face that it was not fine. And I said, okay, well, we'll see you in the morning. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes. This is a grown man, 62 years old, 6'5". There's nothing small or wimpy about him. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. And he said, if I'm still alive in the morning, I'll see you then.
Can each of you speak to what is currently being done in our area and in your realm, or in any place you see where there is something being done to help this issue of homelessness? And we'll just go down the line here, Liz.
Thanks. So in general, the solutions to homelessness, we talk about it as a continuum to housing and homeless programs. So on the front end, we'd like to prevent homelessness where we can. And so at Mahabiatwa, we have the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program. And so we can use that to help someone if they have a one-time resolvable crisis. And so if they normally can make their rent, you know, they're living paycheck to paycheck, and then something comes up. They get sick, a kid gets sick, car breaks down, they lose. Emergency shelter is overnight, oftentimes in hotels and motels. But we can put someone up for a little bit to just address that emergency need. The longer term solutions are transitional housing. So transitional housing is someone, when we can help someone for up to 24 months, they have to work with our transitional housing program. We help them with their rent, and we provide support services, a social worker to help kind of coach them on reaching their goals. To do that, they have to have some kind of goal. They set it themselves. So their goal might be finish my GED, or work to get my health conditions under control, or whatever. We don't care what the goal is, but they identify what the goal is that will help them get to stability. And it has to be a goal that can be accomplished in these 24 months. And then we help coach them towards that. And it's enormously successful, transitional housing. Some folks need more than 24 months to reach their goals. And so for that, we have permanent supportive housing. And so this is, they still, same thing, they pay a portion of their income in rent. We help with the rest. We provide a coach or social worker to work with them on their goals. They still have goals. They're still, we're meeting regularly with them to help them achieve their goals. But we recognize that it might take a little bit longer for them to achieve the goals. And they might have more setbacks. And so that's permanent supportive housing. Some folks don't need that kind of level of support. They just need help with the rent, ongoing assistance. And so we also try, both at Mojave and through the HRA and other programs, we try to have just rental assistance that's available to help people pay their rent. And then in this housing continuum, so prevention, shelter, transitional, permanent supportive housing, then subsidized housing, and then we'd like folks who can become homeowners, and so we also help with, help people save up through our FAME program to buy a home or that kind of thing. So there's a continuum. All of it is dependent on funding, both from the private sector, from generous folks like you contributing to it, and through public, state, and federal dollars. And so there's never enough. We're always trying. But I am excited that continuum exists in our community and is working really well to the extent we have it.
Kind of like Liz said, there's the preventative approach, and then we also have some reactive because we have a lot of people that appear. So I'll talk about a few different things. One of the things that we see from the hospital setting or from the clinic side with my social work staff is that we see a lot of homelessness appear in our emergency room, especially. People come because they don't have anywhere to go and it's 30 below out, so what do? You can go to the emergency room and you can say that you are suicidal and you can get to go somewhere and stay for 2 weeks. People realize that what their resources are that they access, and so some of what we do is we provide emergency assistance. We work with the Ministerial Association and other resources in the community to try to identify what does somebody need today and how can we get that for them, and then how can we help them connect longer term to change whatever is happening in their life. More on the preventative side, through Becker County Energize, we have a strong youth focus. No child grows up saying, I want to be homeless, and so we know that there's a great opportunity to work with our youth to try to prevent that and to help our community understand some of the issues and struggles out there. And so one of the things that's a best practice that's kind of sweeping across communities is talking about adverse childhood experiences. There's 10 different criteria, and if a child has been exposed to, the more they've been exposed to, the more at risk they are. And a child that has been exposed to more than 8 versus 0 is going to have a 20 years less life expectancy. And so, and then there's a lot of data and statistics out there about high rates of suicide, homelessness, and other things that are correlated with that. So one of the things that we've done is work across our community with people that are working with youth to get them training on adverse childhood experiences and trauma-sensitive approaches so that they can recognize who these children are and try to help work with them where they're at with these better approaches so that we can hopefully prevent some of that from happening. And I also have been doing a lot of work. I'm part of the 2017 Housing Institute. There's a group of about 7 of us that have been meeting for a year from multiple different agencies. And we know that it's good for communities to have affordable housing, and it's good for people because your health improves when you can own your home in a safe community. And so we've been looking at how do we create more opportunities for accessible, affordable homeownership. We are developing some program right now, and I can't say too much about that, but there's been a lot of progress in talking about how do we take away the barriers that prevent people from getting into homeownership, such as down payment assistance is a huge barrier for a lot of people. And so how do we try to support people with gap assistance for down payment, because a lot of times it's more affordable for somebody to buy a home because that's cheaper than paying rent. So how do we get more people into that so that they can do better?
So in looking at I had earlier mentioned the McKinney-Vento Act, and so it talks about protections that are put in place for those students. And I had talked a little bit about working to identify. We have a lot of great staff that help me, obviously, in the schools, our counselors and our secretaries. And so once we identify a student, we kind of watch if they're in need of transportation. They automatically qualify for free lunch. One thing is if they're coming to us brand new, we try to enroll them right away and then wait for all the papers that we need to get them going, but we get them started right away and as quickly as possible. We also try to connect them with community resources. I mentioned working with Mojave closely and the Crisis Center. We have buses picking up students every day at the Crisis Center too, so providing that transportation, I know their agency does a great job of notifying us and getting those kids that end up in their shelter attending school right away. I think it's important for those kids to have some normalcy and some things that are the same, and that is why it's really important that we work hard to keep them in the school districts that they are in. They call it their school of origin. So if they start out in Detroit Lake schools, we work hard to keep them there all year. Some of the statistics they have on kids, homeless children, educational challenges according to the National Center for Homeless Education. Almost half of the children experiencing homelessness attend 2 different schools within a school year. And 28% attend 3 or more different schools in a school year. It takes 4 to 6 months for a child to recover academically after changing schools. So that is why it's so important to maintain the consistency of that school. I think it speaks to the mobility. Housing for homeless people is very vicarious, and it can change all the time. And I think of our youth often but it's also families as well. So we have students who may stay at a friend's house because they are no longer staying at home. But then that friend's family has decided they can't have that person there, maybe because they're living in an apartment and only so many people are on the lease and they don't want to get in trouble. So then that person moves from them to another family or friend. So, and the same thing happens with our families. They stay with some people for a while and it's okay for a while. Sometimes those families are thinking, maybe they're only gonna be here a week or 2, but then it ends up to be longer and they can't continue to have them there that long. So we do have students who are highly mobile and they move around a lot. One of the hardest populations, I think, for us is a challenge is our unaccompanied youth. They're really at risk of dropping out of school. A lot of our kids work that are unaccompanied, but also are in school 8 hours a day. So they don't make enough money to provide for themselves, and also renting an apartment, not having rental history, all those things. And that's why we do work closely with Mojave, because they have a youth program that we have housed a couple kids through. One of them was a student that we moved in, I think about a little over a year ago, was in an apartment through Mojave that they were helping subsidize, and this student worked as well. A lot of our kids are working, even after school. Some of our kids are in sports, and we want to keep them in sports. We want to keep things as normal and have the same opportunities that all the rest of our students have. So that is our ongoing challenge, and those are things that we work on every day in our school district to maintain that stability for our kids.
At the Crisis Center, we try to take a pretty holistic approach throughout all of our programs, from our advocacy services to our children's services. With our children's services, we go into schools and provide support groups as an effort to work on some of that prevention, educate children on healthy relationships, domestic violence, to hopefully prevent them from getting into an unhealthy relationship down the road, which could, of course, then result in being displaced. We also have mental health services, and those services are open to any of the women and children that are in our shelter, but also to the community. We'll offer it free of charge if there's no way to pay, but we can bill insurance as well. We also have our general crime department, and so those advocates work with anyone who's been victimized by any sort of crime. And sometimes it involves a landlord or harassment, and maybe they need to leave because they're not safe from other adults, but it might not be in a relationship per se. So we have our advocates who will help identify resources resources for them and make referrals as well to, very often, Wahoogie and some other agencies in town. In addition, we also have our kinship program, and that's more of a prevention type program as well. With kinship, we provide healthy adult mentors to children between the ages of 5 and 16. We've had some fantastic results that have come out of that program, and I do have a few statistics. 52% of youth who have been provided a mentor are 52% less likely than their peers to skip a day of school. They're 55% more likely to be enrolled in college, 46% less likely than their peers to start using drugs, and 130% report they're more than twice as likely to say that they held a leadership position in a club or a sports team. And so all of those statistics are very healthy, positive results. The program isn't just for at-risk youth, however. We have children from very normal families participating in it who have been exposed to things they may not have otherwise had because of their mentor. And I know we've heard it a million times too, where a child was in school and they did really well, they get out of school and go into college and the wheels fall off. And so if they have that mentor that's in their life that they've had from when they were young, that would be another resource to help them stay on track. So I'd encourage anyone who has a little time to spend with the youth in our community. We just ask that they get together 2 times a month, and it can make a huge impact.
I just wanted to mention, one of the things I guess that I feel like that should also be mentioned is we have in our own community the Compassion House and the Refuge, and I know from working with them, one of the significant populations that really struggle with homelessness as well is people in that chemical dependency group. A lot of times they have burned every bridge when they get there, and as these men are recovering from the program, that there's a significant issue with they do a great job with them while they're there, but then they go back into the community and there's nowhere for them to go. And so I know that there's a lot of work that Mel has done around trying to support these men so that they have supportive long-term housing. Another population in our community that you should be aware of also is our senior population. We have a significant amount of senior citizens that are homeless. Many of them are doubled up, living in multiple generations, because as many of you probably know, what you make in Social Security is not enough for a lot of people to be able to afford their home. And so it's a big issue, and we see it quite often, and then it leads to a lot of elder abuse issues where families are taking advantage of the elderly population. And there is a group that recently got together to start looking at that issue specifically about elder abuse, and they're going to be working on a social justice issue around that. So.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that we have some good organizations here who are doing some very good work. So just one more quick little question for you. If you could get one wish, just one wish, that could come true without any questions asked, that you feel would help the homeless, what would you wish for?
I want to have a couple of wishes, but I'll put them under one umbrella. So when I ask homeless people themselves what they most wish for, what they most want from people, they say their number one need is hope. And I ask, what gives you hope? And I think if each of you think about what gives you hope, like on a bad day, what's the sort of thing that gives you hope? Sometimes it's when a stranger might say at the grocery store, might greet you enthusiastically or comment on your shirt in a positive way, or like your earrings, or some kind of nice compliment that says, I'm a human being and I see the humanity in you as well. So I think people who are struggling with homelessness, just that gives them hope, because they, many of them feel otherwise so much shame. For all of you, also for all of us, if we think about, when we've had a setback, and just the kind of embarrassment and shame that sometimes goes with that setback, people who are experiencing homelessness have sometimes had a lot of setbacks, sometimes over many years, sometimes it's you know, a quick set of crises that happen. Karen mentioned our senior homeless programs. Sometimes it's the death of a spouse and then loss of, you know, half the income is gone, you know, and so there's setback after setback sometimes that finally results in homelessness. And so having hope is helpful. Another thing that provides hope, so this will be my way of keeping it to just one wish. We have, I was just talking with our staff about a client this week that a person struggling with homelessness, their family was evicted, 2 adults and 2 kids, mom and dad and 2 kids, because they had a pet, and there was a policy that they couldn't have a pet. And so I understand why, you know, landlords have that policy, but they felt, you know, they were doing a good thing by having this pet for, you know, we don't know their full story here, or I'm not going to share it, but, you know, and so now, because they have that eviction on their record, they can't find housing anywhere. One thing that could give people hope is if any of you are landlords or know someone who has, you know, just a single-family home to rent out, or a bedroom or something, if you could reach out to us at Mojave Ottawa and just figure out how we can work together in a way. We have some rental assistance where we can guarantee your rent is paid. We have social workers who will work continuously with the folks. We can screen people to make sure we're putting folks who are likely to succeed, you know, in your place. That's what our transitional housing program is about, and our permanent supportive housing. We can work with you and be partners. And so I think hope is the thing I wish for most. It's the thing people experiencing homelessness tell me they wish for most, and that's just a couple of ways we can maybe offer hope.
That was wonderful. So I think, as Sharon mentioned in the beginning, I've had 2 homeless teenagers that have lived with me at different points. One of them was a senior in high school. She was pregnant. Her mother had dropped her off at a homeless shelter. She was going to drop out of school, and I went and picked her up and took her home with me, and was able to work with her over the next few months till we could get a plan figured out. I kept her in school. We helped her apply for college. Her daughter is now 7. She has an accounting degree and is doing very well and owns her own home, which is fabulous, because when you look at statistics, she should have never been in the situation that she is now, but she's turned out to be a great success. The other one was a young man who felt very unloved and uncared for in his home, and was really, really struggling with suicidal thoughts. And we helped finance his first vehicle, which he later repaid, and so we helped talk about financial management. We helped that car allowed him to get a job, so he was able to find some meaning and purpose in his life. He has since graduated high school and is now in college as well. When I think about both of them, the thing that made a difference, kind of like Liz talked about hope, was having somebody that believed in them. That's what they needed, was somebody to say, I care about you, and I'm here, and I don't know what I can do to help, but you tell me how I can help you. And both of them still keep in contact regularly, you know, and I know that was able to make a big difference in their life. And so I just think having somebody that believes in them would be my wish.
Well, in addition to those 2, I guess, I would say awareness, I think, is very powerful, and I think today is a good start. That was one thing that surprised me, I think, when I moved up here from Minneapolis. I'm originally from Detroit Lakes, but spent a big chunk of time down in Minneapolis. Homelessness is very out there in Minneapolis, as you know, because there's shelters and there's drop-in centers, and you see people out on the streets. In the rural community, it's very hard to see it as much. So I think awareness is power, and I think living in a small community, I think we're often forgotten about the needs that we have here in our own community, because there's so much, obviously with our capital being down in the metro, I think there's a lot more power given to those communities for their needs because of the location of where that happens to be. But I think awareness is good. It's good to know that this is an issue in our community, The other thing is awareness about a lot of the people I work with, even when I worked in Minneapolis with homeless families, is that, you know, there's a misconception that these people are all on welfare and things like that, and awareness to the fact that a lot of these people work and are working a lot, and their kids are working, and homeless children are working in our high schools who are living with other people. So I think awareness on the issue brings power, and I think awareness in our community, so that our issues here in our community get brought up, you know, at the legislature, and dollars that are spent on the homeless issue are brought back into our community to help solve that. In addition to awareness, I would say housing and affordable housing would be on my list. And I think, you know, that is, like Liz said, that is the one issue that, you know, if you have places for people to go. We have students in our school district who live in Perham because it's more affordable, but their parents work in town. And so those are, I guess, two things that I would say that are just in addition to everybody else's. Anna, how about you?
You guys took some really good ones. So I would echo what the rest of the panel said, but if I could have anything and be a total pipe dream, I would say that every family is healthy and supportive. And by healthy, I mean free from violence, that they're free from child abuse, free from neglect, that they don't see their parents mistreating each other, that they don't have generations that preceded them of unhealthy relationships and aggressive behaviors. And then in addition, mental health. That mental health services were accessible for everyone, that people were able to get the medications that they need, that the stigma is removed about mental health, and that they can be healthy and prosper in their own way. So.
Amen to that, right? The things these ladies have said. Now, that's a nice segue into another issue, that on each of your tables you find a card, commitment card, that talks about what you can do, maybe some of the things you can do to make these wishes come true, how involved you would like to be. Give it some thought, and we're going to have time to talk about this together too. But before you leave, we hope that you will fill out this card, and there's a lovely little gray tug over there on the table that says commitment cards, and that hopefully people will find it somewhere, that we will all find someplace where we can do something to help in this very difficult problem. Now, for the next 10 minutes, we'd like to take some questions from the audience. If anyone has a question for anyone on the panel, is that microphone live at all?
I have a question right away for Karen, because I'm feeling kind of naive or not understanding what are the factors for these unaccompanied high school students? That's the part that I'm least understanding of, is what are the factors that go into being an unaccompanied student?
Let me know, can you hear me? Is it on or no?
This one, I think it's allowed.
It's on.
What is?
It's just not as loud.
Is it loud enough?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Battle of the
Oh, yeah. You know, there's a lot of factors, but I would say the number one is either chemical or mental health issues by the parent. You know, they are choosing to leave because it's a dysfunctional place to be. And so it's you know, they put up with it for a while, and they get to a point where they can't take it, and they leave. And that is the majority, I would say. You know, sometimes it's it's in a disagreement between a child and a parent, and maybe the child moves out for a week or 2, 3 weeks, and is staying with friends, maybe goes back. But the majority of the ones who leave, it's because there's chemical health issues or mental health issues or both in their family, and the student just has reached the point where they've just had enough. So they, for their own safety and all of that, you know, make a choice to leave. And it's difficult. I've had a student that's been homeless almost all school year, and she's had a lot of health issues this year. And I feel bad. She's an 18-year-old who's going through all this stuff pretty much on her own. I mean, she checks in with me and we schedule appointments through my, my office. But I mean, that's a lot to take on for an 18-year-old who's just kind of, she's on her third place to live this school year. She's been coming to school on a regular basis, which of course we like. But, I mean, that's a lot to take on. So she's actually in the CNA program here at Essentia and, or at Ekman, and hopefully we'll get her CNA certificate and be able to have, have that for a job going forward and hopefully expanding on that too.
Let's see this. Okay, does anyone else have this doesn't work. Yes, we have a run.
I like, for our legislative people here,
Here.
years ago here in Detroit Lakes, I'm on the Housing Authority and Development Authority, and we used to have all kinds of help with income-based housing, and most of that's gone away now. Now, fortunately, here just about a month ago, we were able to get a company called Apex Housing, and they're going to put another income-based unit up by Mary's Place, and that's very much needed. But we need more of those places all the time, and we had a bunch of those 25, 30 years ago, but those programs from the state and the federal have both gone away, and those are big help for the poor people. Now, you look at Detroit Lakes, the median family income is $37,500. You talk about affordable housing, what kind of house you're gonna buy with going to see a banker on that? It's very limited. We used to also have programs where you could go and get fix-up projects, and it was help to get some subsidies. Those programs are gone. So a lot of the help that we used to get used to come from state, federal government. Those programs have gone away, and it makes it very tough on our town. And it's the new housing study just came back. We're very close here in Detroit Lakes. Next few years, 50% of our people that live here are going to go over the age of 55. Many of those people all they have to live on is Social Security, so they're getting vouchers to help live on. But if we didn't have the voucher program, if we didn't have the income-based housing that we have right now, we'd really be in trouble. But we need more of it. So somebody's got to get the message in Washington and in the St. Paul that without help for these people, it's going to be very difficult because we have a lot of poor people. And the old saying is that God must have loved the poor because he sure made a lot of them. And we've got them right here in Becker County, and it is a big problem. And everybody's looking for help, but there's only so many places to go. You have a lot of agencies here, but guess what? They all share the same problem. No money. And so it's we need the money, and so if you can get the word back to the people down in Washington, St. Paul, that'd be the best thing we could do to help people here in Detroit Lakes and throughout the country.
Thanks, Ron. Any comments from?
I just want to mention that at the state legislature right now, there's a bipartisan bill to invest $140 million into housing infrastructure bonds. And so it's House File 3125, House File 3125, House File 3125, and Senate File 2939. If you don't remember those numbers or don't have them, it's also the Homes for All bill. One of the things on the commitment card is to sign up for updates so you can hear when that's getting a hearing.
Any questions? Yes, one over here.
Could you say, just quickly, it's for housing and programs for housing?
Yep, it's to build housing, a range of low-income housing, supportive housing, senior housing. It's the housing infrastructure bonds, and so it's the legislature recognizing on a bipartisan basis. It's a bonding year at the Capitol, so this is when they invest in streets and bridges and college buildings and that kind of thing. About 10 years ago in the state of Minnesota, we recognized that housing is an important infrastructure item as well. And so each bonding year, there's proposals to invest some money into housing. This $140 million is just a drop in the bucket for what we actually need. But if you guys, the news out of Fargo, Moorhead, just Churches United for the Homeless just finished their 43-unit apartment building for homeless families and came out of similar kinds of funding. So it can do real good in communities.
This is for anyone. I'm curious about what percentage of people that are homeless have just gotten out of jail or prison, and what is being done to help these people find housing once they get out?
I don't have the percentage off the top of my head. Someone else might, but I could tell you, it's easier to tell you the things that are not being done. So let me just first say that one of the things not being done is when someone comes with any kind of blemish on their record, a felony on their record, any sort of blemish on their record, it makes it almost impossible to get housing because there's such a limited amount of housing that it's, you know, folks with fewer blemishes get that housing. So that's what's not being done. If it's state or federal corrections, different than local jail, everyone who leaves is supposed to have a discharge plan before they leave. So it's state law that says if you're leaving corrections, you need to have a discharge plan. Those and ideally those discharge plans would start, you know, a year or two before you get out, where you take classes on, you know, how to be a good tenant, you know, all of that. That's the idea behind the law. In practice, what happens is just because there's not enough resources, or I should say there are plenty of resources, the resources have not been dedicated to this population. That too often the discharge plan is just, you know, I'm going to stay with my aunt and here's her phone number, and that aunt might not be a real person, you know, and it might just be, and so we need to do a much better job working, you know, as communities to create enough housing so that people can have a better discharge plan.
I think the only thing I would add to that, I work fairly closely with Todd Glander, our county sheriff, and what we've talked about is we know that about 80% of the people in our jail system here locally are there because of drugs or drug-related issues. If they're there for burglary, a lot of times it's for money, for drugs, or something like, or substance abuse. And there's a significant problem with, or I should say a gap, where we have them in jail, and even though we have a drug court, there's an opportunity to improve that, because what we see is that these people, as they're leaving, don't have a great plan of where to go and where to get help to help keep them. One of the other issues I've seen, I used to do some volunteer work at a chemical dependency shelter, and what we would see is that a lot of people there were there in lieu of probation. Oh, thanks, sure.
A lot of people there were there in lieu of probation. And so part of their requirement was to go to like an inpatient program, and they were really successful. And the one that I was at was for women and children, and they were doing such wonderful, great things, and they're working this program. And then when they would graduate from the program, part of the requirement was they had to go back and live in the same home because they were still on probation. So you're sending somebody back to a home that they were using in, surrounded by people that they were using with. And so if we want people to be successful, that's not a good plan. And so I think, again, I don't have statistics or anything, but.
Any other questions?
I was in a Bible study and someone said that they had taken a man in, but he had a toothache and nobody had money, $100 or whatever it is, to go and get his tooth out. Who would I suggested the homeless place for men, but who? So who would I suggest for this person to go to? He has no money, not much place to live. Who do you suggest somebody?
Was he a victim of a crime at all, or was
No,
just?
no, he's just kind of homeless and he needed a place. And
Okay.
somebody said, well, you can stay here
Sure.
for a little while.
So are you asking about where to send them for the dental care, or where to
Yes.
send them for housing reserve, for dental care, or
Either
either?
one.
You know, a lot of times It's a really good question. It's one that we're working to address because there's not a central hub of, this is the place that you go to where they know all the resources. We don't have that. There are a couple resources though. If you are an online user, you can go to Minnesota Help Info and they have information on resources in Becker County. If you are not and you want to send them somewhere, if it's during daytime hours, Monday through Friday, that's convenient for everybody, right? You could go to Becker County Human Services and ask, and they could connect with somebody that maybe you would be able to provide that information. You can call 211 service. 211 is a helpline, and if you dial it and say, where do I go for dental care in Becker County, they're gonna give you a list. Or you could always call one of our many resources, and even though, whether it's Mojave or Essentia or wherever, we all try to work together, even though we don't have somebody's role as the community resource person, we do have social workers or case managers that take those questions, and we do try to help connect people, even if they're not in our site, just because it's the right thing to do. So, is that helpful? So, kind of.
Really quickly, for that particular case with the emergency dental, the closest thing I know is in Moorhead. There's a urgent dental care on Tuesday evenings from, I believe it's 4:45 to 7:45. $30 flat fee. They'll take a tooth out. It's not a dental home by any means, but it's an emergency place at the Family Service Center in Moorhead on Tuesday evenings. And you've got to line up ahead of time, and it's not easy to get to, but that's an emergency place.
Yeah, that's great. I guess I didn't give you a specific agencies, but if that's what you're looking for, Park Rapids has a low-income dental clinic there. There's also Apple Tree Dental out of Hawley, and then in Fergus Falls, and those are the other actual agencies that work with low-income populations that are close.
Well, one of the things that you're talking about, housing that maybe we can help these people buy homes. And I know we've worked with MMCDC and Frazee on a project right now and have gotten a couple of homes built and sold over there, and there's 2 more coming. But as far as homes that are coming on the market in Frazee, people are not having the resources to buy the homes. The landlords are buying them up. They're raising the rents $7, $8, $8.50 a month to live in a 1 or 2 bedroom house that was bought on a Sears and Roebuck catalog, And we're trying to work more with the Community Land Trust, with Guy Fisher and the county EDA to work out a deal where we can help these people by providing the communities would own the land, and then they would pay a little back towards it, but they would already have an equity in the house as they start. And then on the other thing is, we've looked at PACE, the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, to work more towards sustainable energy systems and houses instead of, having 92 coal trains or oil trains come by my house every day. So
I can speak a little bit about the project. I'm on that Housing Institute, and we did look into the feasibility of a land trust for our community. It's kind of too small that we decided that wouldn't be a good option, but we are looking at a housing trust fund, and we're working out the feasibility and interest, and we're gaining support for that. And what that would do would eliminate the requirement to have an upfront down payment, and instead it gets tacked onto the back end of somebody's loan. So if you make $35,000 a year, you're not going to be able to save money for a down payment, but maybe we could help with multiple different pots of financing to be able to afford that gap, that down payment assistance and other things. So it's something we're working on, but that's a good point.
the other thing is, like with Health and Human Services at the county EDA, we are not, putting new people on the list to receive monies because the federal government has not reimbursed us for some of the program the last year and a half. As I understand it, I'll find out more with our meeting So the housing support that the county was doing has been dwindling as people come off of it. It was coming out of the county reserves. So the people in the county are paying for it, not the federal government. And this is a real screw up, you know. The townships, the cities, the counties, the state have to have a balanced budget. The federal government needs to have a balanced budget, not appropriate spending appropriations in these. They spend more time wangling around to get money to run a couple months than they do actually doing anything, it seems. But and that's a lot from the talking heads, but you know, we need a whole realignment in this country on thinking about poverty. That's all I'm gonna say right now, because otherwise I'm gonna start to.
Thank you, that's a good thought, and that leads us to our next thing. I'll just talk loud. I'll use my on-stage voice here, talk loud. But the next thing, we wanted all of you to get some input, to talk about what you think, what you observe, what you think each of us might do about this problem that is growing in our community. And so if you would take some time, either you can bunch up with different tables, sit around your own table, just talk about what you've heard, what you think about this issue, and maybe find somebody in your group who would be willing to share your thoughts in about 20 minutes. Just, you know, just speak up and tell the group what's come from your table and coming out of your hearts and minds on this issue. And if you are, maybe work together to fill out those cards and be sure to drop them in the box. We'll get back together in about 20 minutes. Work together, move around, whatever you'd like to do, and I think our panelists might be joining you in the discussion. So please give the panelists a nice round of applause.
I was just going to add quick, Sharon, that the paper and the markers that are on your table are so that somebody can record your thoughts from your table so that when you share out, you have something to show.